Morning, Mark. Good morning, Mark.
Now you can hear me, I bet.
Correct.
All right. How you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Good.
I'm going to ask, since you're on first, how do you properly pronounce your last name?
That's fine. Antonoli.
Antonoli. Okay, that's what I would have thought. My mother's Minucci.
Minucci? All right.
So I know there's certain vowels and consonants that don't get pronounced.
Yeah, we just skip a few of them. So how you making out today?
Oh, good. I was just going to say, how's business for you guys?
It's heating up a little bit right now. It was slow there for a bit. So I mean, I've remained pretty steadily busy, staying involved in like the service side of the business.
Right.
So that never stops. But some of the projects kind of cooled off a little bit, and now it seems like we're gaining some traction, some good stuff coming out. So
Yeah, we had a slow January and February, but some of that was weather driven too for us.
mm-hmm.
I think projects just got stalled because developers weren't sure their weather was going to permit it to take hold. But we're hearing there's a tipping point with cost now. Some projects may be compromised because the rising cost in materials.
Yeah, copper's up like at a tremendous level right now. I know, so
Yeah.
it's kind of inflating a lot of our piping prices and electrical numbers, and that's a real expense for sure.
Yeah. How you
Yeah.
finding metal, sheet metal, and mechanical units?
Impossible to get. Not so much the ductwork. That is what it is, but the equipment deliveries are difficult. They're all slipping, it seems, every time.
Yeah. And then nobody wants to hear that, right? Clients don't want to hear it.
No, they don't. They don't like hearing that. So best we can do is just kind of let them know up front, like this is what we're hearing now, but things have been slipping and trucking's been difficult. And
yeah, that's going to be the next thing is, getting truckers to deliver product. Because I imagine you rely a lot on common carrier.
Yeah, but it's I've got equipment coming up from Mexico right now, and big question mark on how long it takes to get into Texas. Then once it's in Texas, then it's a week to 2 weeks to get here. So it's kind of like a lot of slop in that number,
There is.
So it's tough because eventually it gets here. You have to inspect it, make sure it's good, make sure you don't have any issues.
Yeah. And then you have the challenge of rising diesel prices.
Yeah.
You getting whacked with any surcharges for that?
It's kind of like a case by case. We get quotes on trucking fees and stuff. So I try not to get surprised by too many of those things. Ideal situation, I've got it covered, and I'm not feeling the pain.
Yeah.
But,
and
we've all get pushed down to the customers.
We've all been at this long enough. We know what to do to cover ourselves, but you're right. But you're right. You still have to pass it on to the customer.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they have to deal with the cost and the timing, and is what it is, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Got anything planned this weekend?
I was trying to get my buddies to go golfing, but one already made plans to golf with his son and nephew, and the others are complaining it's too soggy. So I guess
we got a ton of rain yesterday. My goodness.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Then it was real foggy down your way this morning.
It was a little foggy. Yeah, not terrible, but
yeah, we had a little fog up here, but I know it's supposed to dry out. So I guess no, I don't. I guess I should probably collect all the stuff I pulled out of the gardens and last weekend and take it to recycling.
Yeah, yeah, I've started that process.
Yeah. My wife yells at me all the time because I want to immediately put the snow thrower and shovels away.
Yeah,
She won't let me do it because every year that happens, we get an April snow.
they call this the spring of deception.
Right? Yeah, right. Well, you had to be happy. I mean, some snow and cold weather helps run those heaters a little longer than usual.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's always humidity. You know, it's a tough season for people experiencing, difficulty maintaining humidity levels. So we do a lot of healthcare, and um, the guidelines generally dictate that you maintain a range of humidity, but it's a challenge sometimes on those real dry days. Those colder days where the moisture content's very low. So we struggle through the whole winter season to get humidity levels up, and then just like that, they're too high.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
dying in here. You got to get it down. We're out of range on the high side, and then that's where it becomes difficult because you're trying to dehumidify spaces, and a lot of the equipment's just not necessarily designed to do that.
Well, I imagine yesterday probably created that challenge for you where it goes from a couple of days of low humidity and then all that moisture.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, it's a reprieve to an extent because when it's a little mild, you're economizing, and you can get out from below the minimum requirements for humidity. But
Okay.
when we get into these really warm, humid summer days, it's a challenge.
Yeah, you have a lot of other industrial clients that have that same challenge for moisture in the environment.
Yeah, manufacturing, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, because I know we have a client over does they make a lot of small metal parts for electronics industry, and they have to hold. They're dealing with brass and copper and things like that, and they've got to hold their humidity at certain levels.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's like anything, I guess, from the healthcare perspective, it's always like 30 to 60%. We try to maintain, in the pharmaceutical world, it's a little tighter. It depends on kind of the process there, minimum of like 30. Um, but it's from the office setting, it's difficult because like CDC came out with all their COVID related humidity suggestions. They want it in a higher end of the range.
Oh, interesting.
Um, high humidity levels for a number of reasons they find to be better for minimizing spread of COVID. So you've got CDC telling people to maintain relatively higher levels, but then general creature comfort, and trying to stay away from the high end of the range has people looking to get it down a little bit. So some of the healthcare applications as well, they're talking about designing to 50-60% RH, but with a lot of high outside air exchange rates for these healthcare areas, it's a substantial steam load to humidify to that degree. So there's a lot of just systems not quite being ready for that.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's
ever changing. And it's gonna.
You're experiencing all kinds of newfound challenges.
Yeah, it's gonna wind up. A lot of this is working its way into kind of healthcare design moving forward. Um, you know, some time ago, I guess it was back in the 70s when systems were designed with tremendous amounts of outside air. And then with energy, the desire to kind of be more efficient, reducing outside air. Now it's swinging the other way.
Yeah.
Where we want to purge buildings and bring in high volumes of outside air continuously even. So big energy spend.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. It's no different for us on the building envelope where for years everybody wanted operable windows. Then for energy purposes, they went inoperable with multi-plane pane glass, and now everybody wants to swing back to operables.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I was reading through some of the guidelines for the reopening of restaurants and stuff for downtown in Philadelphia even, and A lot of them state, open windows, box fans in the windows, just trying to get outside air present.
Taking time, particularly out of your busy schedules as facilities folks, to share some of your experience. Today's topic is obviously navigating the new facility challenges of COVID-19 and vacant or nearly vacant facilities. So we're going to jump right into it. Guests, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will, if time permits, at the end of the hour, we will certainly defer to some of those questions if time allows to present them to the panelists. So we'll get right off to the first question that we have for today. This one is for actually all of you, but I'm going to start it with Brennan. What are the biggest challenges you faced with your facilities when occupants were required to vacate?
Yeah, so a lot of our facilities are what we call PSC, our Patient Service Center. They're like in storefront buildings. And whenever we vacated the facilities, there was a lot of civil unrest during that time, and we weren't able to watch them. So we had security concerns, and we had to partner with our landlords to ensure that our PSCs were secure during that time. And it was a bit challenging to make sure that they were secure. On top of that, how quickly all this happened. We had HVAC system concerns as we just vacated, and it was right during the cooling time, heating time. And a lot of our heating systems were set rather high where an unoccupied building wouldn't need to. So we had to partner with our phlebotomists to go out to these locations and adjust these temperatures to the appropriate temperature as an unoccupied building. But we never shut anything off. And then on top of that, we had to go back and look at all through our property leases, as there's dark clauses in our leases that don't allow us to shut down. And those locations, we had to partner with our landlords to get special permissions to be able to be closed in a certain amount of time due to the pandemic. So those three challenges were kind of right on top of our minds as soon as this happened.
Great, thank you, Brendan. Joe, I'll pose the same question to you because you obviously have a unique situation with your building downtown Allentown.
Yeah, when it was much of the same concerns, the mass exodus of people, and then we had people that obviously, we had employees that had left stuff behind that wanted to come back in, and we partnered with our security team and got people in and out the way we need to get people out. Had a lot of HVAC concerns and electrical usage concerns. I wouldn't say they were huge challenge sessions, but they were, questions from upper leadership that wanted to know, could we do cost savings or not do cost savings by shutting down stuff? And we went through shutting down things it causes more problems than not. So, we actually adjusted HVAC controls, used our BAS systems to allow us feedback to see who was on what floors, and we had certain teams coming in still. Our cash ops folks and some other folks that were determined that had to stay, trying to get them in and out of the buildings, using different entrances. This group comes in that entrance, that group comes in this entrance. We have ops buildings that are operating power stations on the grid that had to stay working, so we moved them to different locations in different buildings, and tried to keep folks as spread apart as we possibly could.
Great, thank you. Rob, you probably had some unique challenges as a school district. You were predicated on what the governor dictated for school districts. So what were some of your challenges?
Yeah, so ours, a little bit different than, the other guys who spoke, but, obviously we needed to, maintain a presence just to maintain building integrity in terms of having a skeleton staff on to do building checks every day, just to check for your typical, building envelope type things or plumbing leaks or HVAC leaks. But we had, just dialed back our BAS to minimum settings. Again, given the time, I forget what the exact temperatures were, but, let's assume it was like today. pretty good time for us because there wasn't a big demand for heating or big demand for cooling. So we just dialed everything back to our minimum settings, but never shut anything off. And just keeping, from a staffing perspective, just keeping an equitable schedule distribution of keeping people working that was fair, working with the union folks to come up with a schedule for that was applicable. But really the biggest thing there for us was the cost savings. Obviously being a school district, our budgets are, quite a bit different than the private sector. So, the savings that we recognized from the utility side during that time, we were able to spend, on cleaning equipment and PPE and things like that. Sure, the government grants came at a later time, but we needed stuff now. So we recognized a decent amount of savings. We were able to purchase some things that we needed as replacement.
Great, thank you very much. Now, Mark, yours is a little different. As a mechanical contractor, I'm sure you've been into a lot of facilities during the initial shutdown, and some of those buildings were either vacant or mostly vacant. What did you see from some of your clients?
Yeah, well, a lot of them, I think we have some pretty educated panelists on board here because they were on top of it to the point where they did acknowledge that there are setbacks that they can utilize for controls. So it sounds like all three of them really started to zero in on that and made a point of reducing set points or opening up ranges of dead bands for control of those spaces based on areas where occupants are located. So that was really one of the primary recommendations that we made. If they have a BAS system in place, that's something they want to do. It's a good first step. It's important that you don't just go in and view it as an opportunity to shut it down, to take that system down its entirety and let the environment drift. So I would tell customers if they're looking to do something substantial, if they have an empty building or largely unoccupied, you have to be careful because you want to bring in, based on CDC guidelines, excess outside air to help ventilate these areas where there are occupants. If the building's empty, you can minimize that outside air. If you really have no occupants in, for us, we're a company, we're essential employees. We do a lot of pharmaceutical healthcare work. So our office largely kept on moving. But if you are a facility where you have very little occupancy and maybe even none, you could reduce outside air to a minimum, shut off unnecessary exhaust fans so that you don't, pull the building into a negative essentially and introduce some uncomfortable intrusion of outside air, whether it be cold or humid or hot. Maintain set points, reasonable set points. And then, at the time, you really didn't know how long it was going to go on for. We went home, started working from home, some of us, and thought it might be a week or two, didn't really know. It wasn't the case. So following some of these more, reasonable standards of maintaining set points and conditions in the environment makes it suitable for reentry as well.
Good, thank
They're
you.
kind of the recommendations we make. It really does boil down to what the occupancy is and what the use of the spaces are.
Good, thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspective, Mark, because obviously you see a number of different facility types and how occupied they may or may not be. I'll move on to the next question. And this one I'm going to start with Joe, because Joe, we were having a conversation before we started the event this morning about water, about bathrooms, restrooms. What were you concerned about any standing water in your restrooms or kitchen cafeteria areas? And if so, what changes did you make within the facility?
Yeah, so one of the largest concerns we had here is we have a pretty strict Legionella program. And obviously with water usage already being low with today's technology, with low flow toilets and low flow sinks, the facilities managers are always tasked with, low flow water issues. So we went immediately to a weekly water flushing of the entire system. So we would run water in the entire facility for 3 to 4 hours, test chlorine levels to make sure our chlorine levels were proper. We drained hot water tanks, filled back up hot water tanks. A lot of the newer flushometers are battery operated and charge off of usage. So the new ones actually every 24 hours will automate themselves to actually run, so they charge the battery. But that still wasn't enough. So, we had a lot of flushometer maintenance, flushing toilets, flushing urinals, sinks, running sinks. We partnered with Proasis, which is our water treatment specialist. They came in and made recommendations. With the high rise, obviously, there's a lot of risk for standing water. So, ice machines and kitchens were shut down, turned off, cleaned, and then turned off. The bin ice machines, we got rid of them. We're currently going to like a no touch system on most of our ice machines and everything else. So it was water maintenance, I would say, was our biggest concern through the whole thing.
Joe, just a real quick follow-up. Did you notice a reduction in water use over that period, or neutral, or?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we essentially went from having, 700-800 people in the building to 43, and 20 of them are mine, and 15 of them are security folks. So, I mean, we only had 15 or 20 actually employees in the building each day. And it's one water system here, so it's one big loop. So trying to ensure that we had fresh water and not standing water in the system was a big challenge. And it wasn't like we could turn off part of the building. It wasn't recommended to drain down any water systems. Proasis wanted water in the pipes, and just wanted us to be proactive for flushing toilets, and we actually drain the headers every Thursday. And then what we do is we drain the headers first, so all that water is fresh, and then we start flushing the laterals to the floors to ensure that all the fresh water is getting where it needs to get to. So water usage was extremely affected.
Thank you. Brendan, I guess your circumstance with regard to standing water is probably a little unique, since your facilities, as you mentioned, are not standalone. They're typically in a retail center. What were some of the challenges you faced with regard to standing waters?
Yeah, so due to the long periods of time that they were closed down, we had concerns about sewer gas getting into the facility because the traps drying out. So again, we needed to partner with our phlebotomists to go out to these locations at least once a month. We try to get them there every other week to flush these drains, to fill up the traps, so we weren't getting sewer gas. And on top of that, this was a time whenever supplies were short, and these PSCs are filled with medical supplies due for blood draw purposes. And we wanted to make sure that those supplies during these pickups were getting out to locations that were open, because supply chain during this time, as I'm sure everyone on this call dealt with, was broken. So we wanted to make sure we were getting into these facilities to be able to pick those supplies up and flush these drains.
Good, great, thank you. Rob, I noticed you were smiling. Did you have a lot of sewer gases in the schools? Is that what was amusing?
No, I'm not. But we have that issue consistently in areas that, custodians forget to, pour water down from time to time. And, it's, you can tell people 100 times. And if it's in an obscure area, I always forget to do it. And the smell is unmistakable. And if you're on the customer side of it, man, you never forget it. But it is a pain, and we didn't really have much of that problem, during the shutdown. But it's something that happens. I won't say we're constantly fighting that issue, but it's something that does happen from time to time, and the smell is unmistakable.
Yes, it is. So I'll move on to another question. Mark, I think you mentioned that some of the challenges with shutting down facilities or scaling them back. What were your recommendations to your clients in terms of reducing thermostat settings, cutting back lighting, et cetera, within their facilities during that period?
Yeah, so the largest risk obviously is going to be that undesirable indoor air environment that may come at the hands of shutting down a system, right? So when it comes to setbacks, they're acceptable setbacks. They're certainly recommended. So essentially, you're turning your building unoccupied, but still under control. So instead of like 70 degrees and 40% relative humidity, for instance, you control to 75 and 55. I think you'll even find upwards of 80 degrees and 60% humidity. That's getting up there a little bit. So generally, yes, you maintain some of these wider dead bands in an effort, to save a little bit of energy, maintain higher relative humidity levels, which again is a recommendation. But you've got to be careful too when you're allowing the relative humidity to get up that high, and when you're allowing the temperature to get up that high. Oftentimes, depending on the mechanical equipment you have in your space, you might not have a compressor running as frequently, or you may not have a cooling coil controlling to a discharge air temperature that's below dew point. So when you do this in these buildings, most buildings, you're always introducing outside air. So it really hinders your ability to dehumidify when you have to. So, just keeping it within, reasonable guidelines for humidity and outside air quantities. And, the biggest thing, I think Joe mentioned it about just walking down the buildings, just being present, monitoring the situation. If you have an ATC system that's capable of monitoring humidity levels, that's phenomenal. A lot of people don't have that luxury. So it really warrants some dedication to go and do the rounds and to investigate the internal environment in your facilities.
Great, thank you. Rob, I imagine you probably had this challenge too with all the schools with the vast amounts of lighting and heating and cooling controls within a district. What were some of the things you did to address them?
Well, the lighting stuff was for us the easiest thing. We don't have an advanced lighting control system, so everything was just basically off lighting wise, unless people were in the building doing building checks. And we carried that on for a couple of weeks, and then with our custodial maintenance staff, once we kind of felt a little bit comfortable with where we were going with the situation, we started bringing people back, started working on what we call our summer cleaning and some of our smaller maintenance projects on a much smaller scale. So we were able to have people in the building and using those systems. We talk about the water and the toilets, things like that. We were being active with those, far less than obviously under normal conditions, but it was not a total shutdown situation as it relates to that. So the lighting was real simple. And the unfortunate thing is we'd done some projects with some IFMA members here as far as retrofit LED lighting in our gym, so we weren't able to really recognize the true energy savings for that year. But we were able to just proceed with some stuff. But lighting was simple. Everything else we just dialed back. We talked about several people talked about the set points and the BAS stuff. We just dialed that back, but lighting was essentially non-existent except for the couple hours that people were here doing building maintenance checks.
Brendan, did you experience the same thing? Because basically your facilities were either open or closed, or did you have a different set of circumstances?
So our PSCs, yes, the electrical bill, utility bills, they were all very, very down. Now at our main core facility here at Rubble Road, we saw about a 27% reduction in water usage. We also saw a reduction in power as well, which was a bit surprising because we never truly stopped. We just reduced the workforce by about 37%. But even that, we saw a reduction at our main lab, which was nice savings.
Good. Joe, I'd like you to share, this is kind of a little off script. We were talking earlier about your restrooms. You have a technology that you were using in the restrooms to monitor flow. can you tell the group, the audience here this morning, how you utilize that technology?
Yeah, sure. We did a test. There's some BIS controls that you can actually put on flushometers now that give you usage, daily usage and water usage, to allow you to understand which restrooms in your buildings get used more than others, and which ones, to concentrate on more we use it mostly during COVID to see whether or not we could determine which restrooms are being used. Because even though each floor has a restroom on it, some employees, for whatever reason, favor different floors. So we did put a couple of those sensors on. There's some initial kinks, getting them set up. But not only that, but we also use our Lutron lighting system, which is integrated into our BIS to, it will actually give us reports on what conference rooms are being used the most based on occupancy sensors tripping lights. So we can, if you have these BIS systems, there's a lot of uses for them, just not in energy savings and smarts, but you can actually determine what parts of the building are being used and not being used. So we've tried to leverage that as much as possible. It is a challenge with our IT department getting that stuff on the network, but we're trying to move past that. So we don't have it in all the bathrooms, but we did do it in a couple just to see what the results would be, and they were favorable. So we did get water usage reports from those bathrooms. The other thing I'd comment on too, with the since we were talking about traps and drains, is that I don't know if it was a problem for others or not, but we reached out to our pest control folks early on during all this because traps drying up, not the typical walk-arounds that we normally would have. So I was concerned with cockroaches and everything else that lies in the traps and everything else being tied to the city sanitary system here. So we did a pretty big partnership with them during all this to make sure that we weren't missing anything. And when you start bringing in more air and outside humidity, there's always a chance of unwanted guests coming in with all that as well. So
No, that's a great point, Joe. Rob, you have the same situation. The schools were closed. Did you have the same concerns over rodents and as Joe said, cockroaches in the sewer lines?
So we didn't have those same concerns, and we have I'll call it a pest management system where we have probably like everybody else, a pretty consistent program with our rodent control, and that never stopped. From our perspective as it relates to that, most of our issues are annoyance stuff where you get ants and mice from people, mainly teachers, leaving snacks and goodies around all the time, in a box or in their desk or whatever. And no matter how many times you tell people, look, you can't have this stuff here, you got to get it out, they're the first people to complain when there's mouse droppings on their desk. And you go look in a drawer and there's cardboard boxes of graham crackers and everything else under the sun. And those things, that happens. But we didn't have any major issues as it relates to sewer lines or anything like that.
Now, Rob, I'm just curious, do the teachers keep it for themselves, or are they there in the desk for the students?
I guess that would depend who you ask. I would say it's primarily for themselves.
Oh, okay. All right.
To that point, we had over 250 refrigerators here full of food, desks to go through. There were cereal boxes left on desks, and everybody's snacks were out. So there was a pretty large cleanup when we had the mass exodus here, just to make sure we controlled all that situation. So
yeah, Brendan, I gotta imagine it's probably not different for you. I mean, you got 100 different locations.
You got it. So, and these storefronts are also located to food joints that were also vacated. So we needed to partner with Ehrlich early on to ensure that there wasn't run over, no pun intended, from the suites next door. So yeah, there were some definitely interesting situations after, or when we began to open up, that we had to deal with that.
Yes, nothing would gross me out more than to go give blood and get my blood drawn and see a mouse crawling up my arm. So I appreciate that.
Yes, there are no mouses in our PSCs.
None at
This
all.
is
I have
recorded.
given blood. Right. So I'll ask this question actually of all of you, and I'll start with Mark. Mark, you know, and you obviously can answer this one of two ways: the sites you go to and your own Burns Mechanical locations. But what roles did you see staying on site, and how did you manage for your own staff in your office, but also getting into clients' facilities? How did you manage the access to those buildings?
Yeah, so I mean, like everyone, it was the start of the screening processes as a contractor, you know, trying to conduct work for various customers from medical to manufacturing, office spaces. I mean, a lot of it was just flat out off limits at first. As an engineer or project manager from my position, you know, it was, you know, I was essential, but not as essential as the folks doing the work, trying to get the OR project done, or the, you know, the RO system in line for a pharmaceutical company, so that they could get to work doing, you know, really important stuff to get us through this situation. So, you know, it was just kind of learning the ropes a little bit. It started to become a little almost like a critic or an aficionado when it came to people's screening procedures and how one group was doing something different and than another. And ultimately, they all kind of started to follow a similar, you know, organizational trend towards, you know, distancing and temperature screening. And we implemented similar procedures here in our office, a logging system, taking temperatures. And it really, you know, it didn't take long before everyone kind of had their systems in place. And as that happened, I think it loosened up a little bit in terms of our efforts to work at the various customers' locations. And now things, you know, they feel pretty, you know, still restrictive, certainly, but you've kind of adapted to it in such a way where it's not all that disruptive. So it's, you know, it's something that's going to change some more, I'm sure. Hopefully it you know, we look back and we don't think about the screening procedures as a something you have to kind of go through every day. But, you know, for the time being, I think we're, you know, kind of accustomed to operating like this.
Mark, I'll just ask you a follow-up question, because obviously you service a lot of our IFMA members. Did you find it during since the pandemic began back almost, you know, a year ago, more than a year ago now, have you incurred additional costs as a result of protocols you've had to put in place, or protocols clients have had to put in
Yes.
in place?
Yeah. Before you even finish, yes. So, you know, when it first started, yes. I mean, anyone who, you know, obviously came in contact with someone suspected of, you know, even if we had someone, you know, show up to do a job one day and their wife called and said, "Hey, my sister was over last night, right? And she's got a fever. And I'm just letting you know, no one has symptoms, but, you know, other than her, you know, she doesn't feel well." So, you know, as a responsible, you know, individual, you need to let those know, like, hey, this is the case, and boom, off you'd go. They'd send you home. And, you know, and you were kind of faced with having, you know, a situation where it's like, you don't feel comfortable passing that on to the customer. You know, it's like just one of those things that you kind of have to work through. And I was impacted on, you know, a lot of my work, and other folks here in our office. I know they had it worse than me, you know, where you might have a job and you get the guys into a real great rhythm and you're moving forward, and then everyone go home, you know, and you're a week waiting for results. And yeah, it slows down progress and efficiency for sure. And buying equipment, you know, getting equipment from a factory that goes through a quarantine period. You know, it's supposed to be on a truck tomorrow, but guess what? This just happened and it's not, and we can't tell you when it's going to be on the truck. So yes, many challenges. Try to just be very forward with customers and let them know. And for the most part, everyone's been pretty understanding and reasonable because we're all going through it together.
Good, thank you. And we'd had a conversation, Mark and I had a conversation before we began today's event about supply chain and the challenges currently as a result of last year's issues. So we've already got a topic for a future event. So thank you, Mark, for that today. Rob, I have to imagine, Rob, for you, it's got to be challenging. Do you use an access control for the schools, or is everybody still entry via key?
So luckily that's something for me that falls on our IT guys. Which they do have access controls. It's real simple. So, everyone has a swipe card type thing, and they were able to lock everybody out, fairly easily, except those who needed to. And, they keep that thing on pretty tight wraps as far as who's allowed access to what buildings and when. So again, really, it was just a handful of maintenance guys and custodians for several weeks until, a couple other people started trickling back in. There was a few of us who were here every day, but, like everybody else, most people weren't around. So, the IT guys were able to lock down that access control pretty easily. But I'm just going to change topics a little bit, Mike, on something that Mark said. Talk about like supply chain and things like that. Just two things that we learned. We had some projects that we were able to do with vendors we had planned to do during the summer, and we were able to do those things during the lockdown because, the rules permitted, and there was some special school construction, I'll call it dispensations, for lack of a better word, at the time. And, we have a pretty tight knit group of people that we use for vendors that we trust and do right by us. And, it was a win for both of us because working with those folks, we got projects done ahead of time, but two, during that very time, we were able to keep those guys working. There's a couple of vendors that we kept people working for probably a month straight, and that we were the only job they had. And, there's a certain, community responsibility that I feel working for the school district, that we were able to keep some people who live and work in our community working during that time. And that, that made me feel pretty good. I'll be honest with you. We were able to keep some people employed in a really rough time. But as it relates to the supply chain stuff, man, you really found out who your friends were, and getting you the things that you needed, who was really well connected. And fortunately, we partnered with some great vendors, and some were better than others just based on what was available. But, you really start to realize the value of having people who have a broad web to cast in order to help you out.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. It's fine going off topic there, Rob. And I appreciate that the school district thought of your business community during that period. And I know I've spoken with each of you independently, Brendan, Joe, and Rob. One of the benefits you all had with vacant buildings that many jumped on immediately is the buildings are empty. You could get in there and do some remodels, refreshes, new fit outs for Brendan in terms of, possible new locations, without the added challenges of logistics with staff in the building. I know, Joe, at the tower, you're undergoing some significant renovations, which have to make it very convenient to not have personnel in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the cost savings that we've had to be able to do some of the projects that we had to do, it's a concrete building, so we affect, every floor below and a couple floors up. So we've really been able to get a lot of work done. So there are some good things that came out of it.
Yes, not a lot, but there's some. Brandon, back to the access question. Are many of your facilities key entry? So if they are, how did you control people just showing up?
Well, that's a very good question. So our PSC locations are indeed keys, which is something that is currently on my agenda to try to fix within 2021. Not a lot of time left. So these keys are given to phlebotomists, and they do sign waivers. And we really relied on the policies already put in place for access into the facilities. Now, our main facility here at Rebel Road and their ACLs, they are all badge access. And we were able to monitor and shut down, if needed, those accesses to the building. But more to come to that, when the pandemic started, we did have to go through, a large amount of furloughs, so we didn't actually have termination. but yeah, we were able to watch, but we didn't lock out.
Hey, Brendan, just for the audience, just to put it in perspective, how many locations do you have outside of the Roble Road location?
So we have, to break it down into 3 different groups. We have our patient service centers, which you've heard me refer to as PSCs. Then we have our acute care labs. These are facilities that are embedded into the Lehigh Valley hospitals and other networks as well, like Holy Redeemer. And we have about 10 of those. And I don't manage those facilities in a building perspective, but to a workflow perspective for equipment, we do work with them on that. And then we have our main facility here at Roble Road, of course, and that's kind of my main building I manage.
And those patient facilities, again, just so the group knows how many people had keys, how many of those locations are there?
Yeah, so there's 56 locations that are storefronts. So there is at least 3 phlebotomists on average for each of those locations. But then it doesn't mean each location only has 3 phlebotomists that have access, as we have floaters and supervisors for them as well. So the key list for these locations is quite extensive. So there was a lot of keys out there, but we do know who has what.
So you have a lot of replacements to complete in the next 9 months to get those off of keys.
I sure do.
Yes. All right, gentlemen, I'll move to the next question. Mark, we'll start this one with you. What are some of the risks of dialing back or totally shutting down an HVAC system?
Moisture. So biggest primary issue, having an uncontrolled environment is excessive moisture, where you could begin condensing on surfaces. Once that happens, you run the risk of having, the formation of mold in your building, which, big problem, leads to remediation costs, cleaning of HVAC systems, purging of systems. So that's kind of the primary failure, I think, associated with, just openly shutting off systems for HVAC. Obviously, we touch base on water concerns. So, Legionella risk associated with domestic water systems, absolutely. Flushing systems, maintaining flow out of the faucets, just kind of keeping water moving is key. That's for domestic water systems, but it also applies to cooling tower systems, water features outside, where you don't want to have the opportunity for water to just stagnate and kind of grow bugs. Boiler systems as well. A lot of the setbacks now. You have a hot water boiler system where perhaps you don't need to run as many boilers as you had. If you're going to keep them filled, keep them warm, keep them rotated. If you have boiler systems, you want to drain them down, there's a proper way to kind of lay them up where you put desiccants in them or an inert gas to kind of have them sit idle, but don't let them be cold and don't let them sit, or else you'll experience corrosion. So really, I think like the common theme with all 3 of these is the act of shutting down. If you can maintain a reasonable environment and operation of your equipment, don't stop maintaining equipment just because it's lightly used. Filters still need to be changed. If you're going to get dirty coils, dirty filters, you're going to spend energy. So there's an energy impact to avoiding maintenance. So it's really important just to kind of continue on as you can with regards to the integrity of the equipment. Allow yourself the ability to adjust to some set point deviations, but keep things going primarily.
Okay, and I think Rob and Joe, both of your facilities, you said, are on BAS systems, so you're able to control them. Brendan, I imagine you've probably got a different circumstance. Again, being in retail centers, you're probably not tied into a BAS system. Is that correct?
So our main facility here at Roble Road, we are on a BAS system. And now at our PSCs, we've looked at technologies, but due to our HIPAA regulations, we can't use these technologies as it puts us at risk. We are still looking to find ways to tie all these locations into our single point BAS system. But at this time, it's a good old, thermostat, and push it up when we go hot, push it down when we go cold. unless we're partnered with Lehigh Valley, but for the most part, yes.
So I imagine in those facilities, those buildings, you probably were only able to set it back, not turn it off in its entirety.
Oh, correct. Nor did we want to turn it off in its entirety. So we set the set points pretty low during the summertime, and then winter time, and then the summer we use less cooling. But to Mark's point, we didn't want humidity in the building as well, so within reason. And that required staff to physically go out, set it, watch it, that kind of stuff. So
now, did you have to also coordinate with adjacent? You mentioned earlier the challenge with pests with adjacent suites in those retail centers. Did you have to coordinate with your landlords to ensure that your adjacent tenants were not turning theirs off in their entirety and subjecting you to some mold issues?
yeah, we had a few, 2 or 3 issues where pretty much the whole strip was vacated, and those cases we were actually in the building able to watch. But we did have our vendors, such as Ehrlich, consistently go to the closed locations. They had phlebotomists there to open the doors to make sure we could keep that down. So yeah, a lot of partnerships going on to keep them safe and up and operational for when we were ready.
Yes.
Which we are now. We're open.
We've all gotten much better at collaboration and coordination in the last 12 months. Mark, I want to pose a question to you and then to the rest of the panelists from one of our attendees. They were curious if any of the panelists, and I'll start with you, Mark, have evaluated some of the emerging technologies like needlepoint bipolar ionization in HVAC systems. And if you did, what have been some of the, have there been pre and post testing, and what are some of the resulting outcomes?
Yeah, so there's a number of different technologies available right now for essentially deactivating airborne bacteria, viruses, fungal contaminants, in the airstream. Traditionally, we have a lot of experience utilizing UV lighting in systems. Bipolar ionization, needlepoint bipolar is more so an emerging technology with some pretty positive results. If you consult with ASHRAE, really, they'll tend to back up UV more so because it's got a longer track record. It's been out there for a much longer period of time. There's not a unit that we don't look to implement UV lighting in. It's a relatively inexpensive add to a new piece of equipment. The retrofit cost and application, it's a little bit more costly. There's a little bit more maintenance than with bipolar. The big tipping point has been ozone generation with these technologies. So whereas UV in the spectrum of light that it emits, it guarantees no ozone production. Bipolar ionization, different story. There was evidence of ozone production. However, it seems like a lot of those technologies, as they've come along, have mitigated that potential. So I think they both stand on their own 2 feet and offer a safe means of addressing airborne contaminants. And there are others, but those are the 2 most prominent technologies in use right now.
Thank you, Mark. Joe, is PPL currently implementing any of these technologies in the tower or at any of your other facilities, or have you investigated any of these new technologies?
Yeah, so all of our HVAC systems, for the most part, have UV lights and have had UV lights in them. The comment I would make about UV lights is, you need to put them in an airstream where they're going to be in contact with the air as long as possible. So I think I've seen some of the retrofit kits that I don't really agree with where the UV light goes because of the brief contact that it has with the air. So, you want as much exposure to the air as possible when you're putting UV lights in. And then, when you put UV lights in, can you monitor them? So we actually have a product here that is connected to our BIS system that will let me know when each individual UV light burns out. So I get a alarm on my BIS that tells me which units have working UV lights and which units don't. So I think if you're gonna, it's a big maintenance cost and it's important to have in. But when you do it too, as a facility manager, you want to know that it's working, and you're trying to monitor it with, the least boots on the ground as possible. So those two products that we have are great. We are adding ionization units. There's one that does not produce ozone. Mark, that was a good call. A lot of the older ones did produce that, and that was the deal breaker for a lot of people. So we took pre-tested the HVAC air quality. We're just putting these units in now, and I'll be able to report back in a couple months to see what the difference is as far as air particulates go in those floors that we put the ionization units in. So I think that, coupled with the UV lights and the new COVID outside air stuff, should make it for a real good atmosphere.
Joe, when you complete that assessment, is that something you'd be willing to share with the IFMA facility manager members?
Sure.
I mean, put you on the spot. If you have to check with somebody, that you can get back to me later.
I don't think that's not, shouldn't be an issue.
All right, great. Rob, how about you? You implement anything in far new technologies or former technologies?
Well, again, much like, Mark and Joe just said, I've been working on the needlepoint for a while. In the school, it's, we've had access to a lot of government funding. It's just a matter of convincing the people that I answered to that this is the right way to go. We got a couple test units we put them in, and one was a classroom. And then we did a pre and post test in there, and again, we're talking about one classroom and a unit ventilator. But we typically have pretty good air quality. We test our air quality on an annual basis. In that particular room, we had pre-test, we had, a minimal spore count. But after having the ionizer in there for, I think it was probably 3 or 4 months after we tested, the spore count was literally 0. So, and speaking to the teacher, in the room, she said she noticed a big difference in the amount of dust in the air, as well as, a decrease in static electricity. So take it for what it's worth. It's one teacher in one classroom. Right now, that's the only data that I have to work off of. So that, what Joe would be able to share those would be great, because I am looking to try to, implement this on a larger scale. We've bought a couple other units to put in some areas like our weight room and our board room and some higher occupancy areas. But I know there are several school districts, that I'm familiar with, at least in the Lehigh Valley, who have done this. But I haven't seen any pre and post test data. And, for me, it goes far beyond COVID. I mean, this is really air quality issues going forward, because that's one of the things we always hear about, whether it be teachers or kids, mold or moisture or whatever. And my understanding is that, for me, this is really where the value is. Does it help with COVID? Sure. But it's really post-pandemic that the benefit, I see it for us.
And Brendan, I'll get to you. I just want to go back to Mark real quick. Mark, is Burns working with any clients who may have these technologies in place or putting them in place in the near future to do some case studies and maybe issue some white papers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of our customers that do have them installed, and whether or not they're doing pre and post counts on them or doing air quality monitoring, I can't answer to that specifically, but I'm sure I could reach out and see which of our customers are actively monitoring these installations. Like Rob said, the whole premise of doing this is in an effort to combat COVID. But if it did one thing that has been neglected prior to COVID, it's just the absence of really looking at indoor air quality. So just building on what he had said, it's a good opportunity for everyone to kind of play catch up and look at ventilating buildings appropriately. We do have code ventilation rates for outside air based on occupancy and use. And, we need to start paying attention to it and ensuring and taking air readings and making sure that the occupants are aware that, yes, we're properly ventilating the space. Yes, we've invested in these technologies. Looking at retrofit applications for UV, like Joe said too, there's a right and a wrong place for putting UV lights. In a system, you need to increase your dwell time. The kill rate at which you can generate with UV placement is critical. So, this insight looking in really hard at indoor air quality is great, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So it's good to see that everyone's investing in these technologies and
agreed.
building a cleaner environment.
Agreed. Now, Brendan, I imagine this has to be tough for you to convince landlords in most of your retail centers to invest in any kind of technology, let alone air quality technology.
That is correct. We don't own the locations. We lease the PSC locations. However, this is one benefit for us being a lab here at Rebel Road and the ACL, that a lot of our ACLs exhaust 100% of their air. And including here at Rebel Road, we are a lab, so we're used to being very careful about the air that we're breathing due to the tests that happen actually right behind me. So we were in a good position for this one in a lot of our facilities, just due to the nature of what we do. But yes, I have been kind of keeping track of the new technologies coming out, and they're quite exciting.
Good. Well, I'm going to move to another question, and this is again for all of you. How can facility managers and owners make the most out of long unoccupied periods of time within facilities? And Brennan, I'll start back with you.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on it right in the beginning. For me, it was renovation projects. Because we were part of healthcare during the initial lockdown, we knew we were going to have to open up rather quickly to begin those COVID testing for asymptomatic patients. And knowing that we had to redo our waiting rooms, we had to do a lot of work that typically would have to do off hours due to just the volume that we see on a day-to-day basis. So giving us these few months to be able to kind of reset the table with these closed locations, that was an unfortunate event, the biggest benefit we were able to do. And there were quite a few of our PSCs that we were able to kind of, if you will, gut and remodel during this time. So it was taking the best of a really bad situation.
Great. And Joe, how about you? What do you think that facility managers and owners can do to make the most out of these unoccupied spaces?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think taking advantage of the time you have with unoccupied buildings. We ramped up our maintenance program. I'm fortunate to have a maintenance group here. So, we really took time and took a step back and evaluated equipment and got to take a real hard look at equipment that we always service, but we don't necessarily service in that manner or evaluate in that manner. Vibration, all different kinds of stuff on pumps and evaluating systems. We got to really dive into some systems that we've had some issues with, that we've kind of put duct tape and Band-Aids on for years. And I think we got ahead in that sense. Projects was another big thing, but the thing with us is every 2 weeks it was a different plan. So all right, we're going to do this. All right, we're going to do that. The business needs this week. Now the business needs something else the next week. And you wanted to make sure that you didn't spend money that was going to be thrown out in 3 or 4 months. We went to an open air concept office furniture setting here with very low furniture panels. And then the CDC comes out and says they want barriers around people. So, we spent a ton of money making brackets and topping all those low office areas with plexiglass and glass panels to bring them back up to a height where people had protection again. So there was a lot of going back and forth. And, right now today, I don't know what businesses will be back in the building and what businesses won't be. That hasn't really been released yet. I know there's several groups that'll probably never step foot in the building again. And, we're also going to this shared work surface model now where, people aren't going to have assigned seating, and we're going to have some kind of platform on a cell phone or a computer to reserve a workstation and out, and so it really changed everything for us in a very short amount of time. So I think, just taking a step back and looking at things holistically and trying to decide what the best decision is, where we're at right now.
Good, thank you. Rob, I have to believe as a school district, you probably made the most out of it with just the peace and quiet with no kids around, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And really it was a benefit, like I said, for our custodians to get their summer cleaning, started early. And then, a whole bunch of, I'll call it smaller projects, which I've mentioned before, whether it be tile or floor replacements or some painting, and lighting projects, things like that. But like the other guys said before me, really getting things done, having the opportunity to have a, basically unbothered workspace is priceless, and trying to make the best out of bad situation. But really the other thing was just harvesting the savings from the reduced utility usage to be able to fund some, in our case, whether it be equipment replacement or purchasing of new stuff that we probably wouldn't have been able to do in a normal situation.
Good. And Mark, I imagine based on what the other three gentlemen have said, you probably saw an increase in some service work and perhaps some replacement systems.
Yeah. I mean, other than just, generally the energy gains that can be made when there's a period of shutdown like this, it's an opportune time to do service work, to do shutdown work, to replace equipment, renovate. Elective surgery was pretty much canceled, so when is there ever, hopefully never, a time like we had to perform work in operating room suites that are generally the most demanding, areas you can find, but that's where we found ourselves. And we did a lot of work in areas that normally would have been, almost impossible to access, for any reasonable amount of time. So, that was huge for us and for our customers. But, implementing thorough HVAC equipment evaluations on equipment airflows, performing these services, very critical. And, it offered us an opportunity to put some lists together for service customers of ours that, they might have had filter and UV lists of what they thought they had. Some of them didn't have anything, so it allowed us to put together a good, this is what you have here. This is on your roof, and these are the filters you need. And just the, looking at supply lines too. I mean, all these guys, I'm sure, would have experienced deliveries for new filters, whether it be, MERV 13, 14, HEPA, you name it, that there's a shortage on synthetic filter media, commonly found in most like MERV 13 filters, which is the filter medium and MERV rating that the CDC recommended at a minimum. So there was a rush on material, and we find, filters taking months to get, UV lights taking months to get. So just because you've got a new set in now doesn't mean you don't need to be ordering for next year, because it's a very long lead time to get your hands on these filters and other materials. So using this opportunity to shore up that side of your business and making sure you're prepared, that's a big deal. So,
Mark, that really leads into the next question. What should facility managers think about before they bring back their personnel in mass to their facilities? You mentioned that making sure they have adequate supply of filters. What other considerations would you recommend?
Yeah. So, I mean, other than just, normal, individual spacing and hand washing and all the stuff that everyone has to be mindful of, from an air system, it's, I think a basic thing you can do is to implement a purge of your building. If you're bringing people in, ventilate it well, get some good air exchanges for a couple days before, verify your outside air dampers are functioning, verify your stages of cooling, your compressors are functioning, so that you can maintain an environment that's suitable. So, while we're running at half capacity, make sure that you're bringing in, your HVAC service providers. They're willing to help. This is what they do. So, give them the opportunity. They'll sit down. The ASHRAE, for one, I mean, if you go and read through their publications, they were phenomenal. When this all started, their publications started coming out every day. They had more and more information available. And now on the ASHRAE website, there's just a tremendous amount of information for reopening, just excellent tasking lists for water, for air, just tons of information and guidelines and steps that you can follow and utilize for reentry.
Good, thank you.
Utilize it. It's there.
Mark, do you happen to know of any good mechanical companies that could come back in and take care of those services?
Yeah. They're out there. Burns Mechanical is one of them. And we like to think that we do a solid job and look at every building. They're all unique. They're all different. They have different needs. Day one, they're all different. So it warrants some critical thought and evaluation on not necessarily where you need to get to, but what's the best path to get there.
Right.
So it's a team effort. Absolutely.
Yeah. Joe, what would you recommend to your facility manager peers before they bring folks back into their facility?
I think Mark hit a lot of the big points, but I think making sure that folks understand how the building's going to operate post-COVID, what the new protocols and guidelines are, having some kind of website or directory for your folks to go to, especially with locations that have multiple buildings. So, we have, buildings all over the state. Some of us go to different buildings every day. What happens at one building may not be the same at the other building. So, what are the guidelines? What is the company's rules going forward? Just having an information out there for employees to feel comfortable to come back to work, and maybe having some documentation out in the buildings where you're explaining how you're disinfecting or cleaning and what you've done to ensure that people want to come back. Because I think the hardest thing for everybody coming back is going to be, is it safe? Do we want to come back? How do I know the person next to me got the vaccine? Or so I think from a facilities manager standpoint, we're going to have even more coddling or helping people out than we did before, trying to make people feel safe. So I think above and beyond all the mechanical stuff is going to be the personal touch, where you don't always want to tell everybody everything, but sometimes more information is better than not. Having some posters and some stuff around the building. I know we have certain walk paths designated a certain way so people don't walk past each other too many times. Our elevators are marked with number of passengers. We have disinfecting signs up on how we disinfect, the product that we use. The safety sheets are there in case anybody has questions. All that little stuff that you don't think of that may make somebody uncomfortable to be in the building or not.
Yeah, good points, Joe. I particularly like that information on a website. That's key, because people can access it pretty easily before entry into a building. Yeah, real good. Brendan, I imagine it's got to be unique for you, as it was Joe just said, with multiple locations and coordinating that. But again, what would you recommend before bringing occupants back to a building? Because for you, it's got to be tough. You're talking not only your staff, but also patients.
Yeah, so it's kind of like two different fronts. So if we're kind of talking about the patients, it's all about the signage and getting that signage out there, reinforcing the social distancing rules, and then not only that, we also want signs to say, hey, this area is dirty, hey, this area is clean. And that way customers can see, dirty rooms, seeing us clean them, then they're clean. A lot of those visual cues to kind of reinforce that we are doing everything we can. And on that front, it's also very important to consult your janitorial team. to make sure when you're coming in that they're ready for kind of the new guidelines they're going to have to do. We implemented, daily cleanings of doorknobs, things that weren't done, or at least publicly seen on a day-to-day basis, and kind of reassuring customers and staff that, when cleaning's coming through, we want them to kind of do it right in the middle of the day so everyone's seeing, we're wiping down everything, everything's getting wiped down. And on top of that, policies are very big. You're going to have positive cases. So what are you going to do? Who needs to know? And how do we keep it confidential? And it's really a smaller group, at least within H&L. Build those policies around. Here in H&L, we have a policy stat program that when we create one, everyone gets it, or who would concerns. So they all get to read that policy. So definitely have those policies in place. And get ready to social distance your cafeterias, your waiting rooms, your work areas. Those definitely need to happen. And lastly, temperature monitoring is something that we were told to do. I find that everything we've talked about between Joe and Mark are the biggest and most important, but I feel that temperature monitoring really makes the employee feel safe that the person sitting next to me doesn't have a temperature. And definitely put something around there. We were able to adopt a touchless system. Maybe that may not work for you, as they're not a cheap system at all, but definitely have some process in places for that.
Great points, all real good points. Rob, anything you want to add to the conversation on this item?
Yeah, just two quick points reminded me. We were talking about multiple locations, and as we were talking, the FedEx guy came. But one of the things during the shutdown that was, seemingly not a big deal, but was coordinating with our mail delivery and all our, it'd be Amazon or UPS, FedEx, that we're going to all the buildings to be able to connect with those guys and make sure everything came here to one location. Because still, from us, bills need to get paid, so on and so forth. So to be able to coordinate, that simple task of consolidating package and mail delivery to one location, and we could put it out to where it needed to be was not an easy task, but was really valuable to us, just to keep the operation moving. But second to that, more related to what we're talking, sure, all this stuff is important, absolutely, but we spend a lot of time and money making people feel good, and I think that's really what it's all about, right? Sure, disinfecting, having hand sanitation, stations all over the place, doing this, that, and the other. Yeah, it's important, but the biggest value in it for me, what we've learned as the science has evolved, is making people feel good, right? Because if you're, have hand sand available, that means you're doing other things too. But, like I said, as the situation has evolved, it's become more important to make people feel good about being where we're at. And, having, several hundred kids back in each building, and some teachers were apprehensive and some were more open to it. I think that what we've learned after a couple of weeks of things going well, people kind of drop their anxiety level a little bit about being back. And I can just assume it would be the same way in a private sector environment.
Yeah, you make a great point, Rob. I can tell you, I'm sure you probably are picking up mail that was probably previously to be distributed to teachers and other staff administrators within the school. It's a consideration from, I'm sure, your vendors. All of your vendors don't know who's in the building, who's not in the building. Is it totally vacant? Is it partially vacant? So I imagine you all had to kind of coordinate where to put things, just to redistribute it. You probably scan it and send it to the right people via email because you have nothing else to do during the day. Joe, how'd you handle that? You had, hundreds of people in that building. Did you have to contact all the vendors that send stuff to each and every person?
Yeah, it was a big undertaking, and obviously we can't just send corporate mail to employees' houses.
Right.
So, we wound up with individual mailboxes for each person, was in contact with each employee. When packages came, we had to get in touch with that employee. We've dropped packages off. We have a lot of test equipment that comes to our engineers, new vacuum breakers, the new Viper switches for the poles, and all the engineers have all this stuff that they're testing. So trying to get that to a spot where they could get to it to see it. The mailroom went from, a pretty casual thing to just how do we get FedEx delivered when no one's here. So it was quite the undertaking.
Yeah, I imagine logistics became very challenging, just moving parcels and mail to staff. While we're
I mean,
still,
we went to a lone worker thing for most of our field workers. So we took our electricians and our substation guys and we sent them to different substations so they weren't in buildings. So, we're delivering to substations and you guys know where they are, mountains and wherever they may be. We didn't have a process for it. I mean, obviously no one was ready for what what was going to happen. So it was a good learning experience.
good. While we're still on this subject, I do have a question from the audience. And Mark, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Is there any consideration to exploring duct cleaning prior to having employee reentry to a building?
Yeah, I would say yes. It's probably worth just examining, doing a visual on the interior of duct systems for just typical general cleanliness. The wettest area in your system is going to be your cooling coil. So that's where you're hitting dew point. That's where you're getting rid of moisture that's in the airstream. So, you're going to have a wet environment at or around the air handling unit. If you have velocities that are excessive and you're getting carry off on coils, if you're, at saturation and you don't have safeties on humidifiers and you're over, humidifying airstreams, and yes, you can have moisture that finds its way out into the duct system and could be a problem. Breaking down of insulation systems where, you're getting a lot of moisture on the exterior of ductwork as well, is a problem. So yeah, I mean, it's always a good idea to go and do a visual and make sure that you've got a system that's, free of any type of growth. And if it is a problem, you identify that space and yeah, there's duct cleaning services available to get in some pretty difficult to reach spots to remedy some problems in air distribution systems.
All right.
So
good.
yeah, definitely something to consider.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm going to move as we're close to conclusion here. I'm going to move to our last question, and this is just kind of wrap up the panel discussion. What lessons have you all learned that you'd like to convey to others with regard to your unoccupied space that we're going to have to carry on, or you anticipate carrying on into the future? And I'll start with Rob.
Boy, I think for me, it's less about unoccupied space, but really what we talked about pretty extensively before, just the addressing of air quality, indoor air quality going forward. I think just inherently makes sense. And also, to my point I made before, it makes people feel good about being there. If people know we're putting ionizers in their classrooms, they're going to feel more safe about being there. And it should also improve the air quality. But for me, the lesson going forward is really that, paying attention to and doing what we can do to improve air quality, going forward post COVID.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. Brendan, how about you? What are you going to take forward that you can share?
Well, a lot of what we've discussed in the meeting, absolutely. But one thing through the whole pandemic, we learned that working from home, we built a lot of KPIs around that. A lot of departments, they have that ability to work from home. And I really see in the future, myself included, that we're going to be asked to find new ventures for all these lease spaces that we have, all these office spaces, and utilize the space that we have, or maybe minimize what we have to kind of reduce that lease or those costs, those monthly costs we have. So moving in the future, I definitely see us being asked to make a lot of changes within the work environment, as now we see work from home for adults works.
Unless you're home teaching your students, your K through 12 students, then maybe it doesn't work so well. Joe, how about you? What would you like to share that you're going to carry forward?
A couple I guess the biggest thing I would point out is that I don't know what we would have done had we not had a BIS system to monitor all the different buildings and everything through the system. So I know BIS is sometimes a bad word in facilities, and it's a lot of money and expense. But our job would have been 100 times harder here had we not had the information and inputs coming in from the BIS system to be able to look at an area in the building and find out the RH and look at airflow and the economizers and even trend. I mean, I can tell you how many times our outside air dampers open and close in an hour if I want. I can trend that and I can get a report on that. But I think the other thing is, you know, managing that space economically, safely, and being able to, you know, track who's using that space. So, you know, you're having a big unoccupied spot in the building, and you don't want people in it. I would say we got to lock it down, take the furniture out, get rid of it, and make sure otherwise people will be in there and you'll be cleaning, won't know to clean or have to clean. And so I think there's going to be a big push, like Brennan said, that, you know, we're going to be challenged with what to do with all this space and how to manage it. So I would say we got to start looking at that now and not waiting till later and try and find solutions for that space.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Mark, how about you? What would you recommend moving forward?
You know, like we talked about a lot of this, keeping temperature and humidity setbacks sensible, verifying, as Rob mentioned, outside air, code ventilation requirements, just keeping your finger on the pulse of indoor air quality and outside air introduction. Continue to service your equipment, maintain supply lines for filters, UV, and have a trusted group of service individuals that can help you get through your problems when you do encounter them. That's HVAC technicians, it's water treatment specialists, you name it. If you don't have a BAS system, like Joe just said, that offers you the insight to see all of this information and educate yourself and inform you and your team on what you have in front of you, start thinking about it. A lot of buildings are pretty much standalone. They don't offer that much. There's some pretty impressive technologies now to put that information in front of you on a desktop or on your laptop or on your phone. It's pretty impressive stuff. If you're planning to do equipment replacement, start thinking about the features that you want that equipment to have that it doesn't have now. So for instance, BAS integration, economizer, ventilation requirements, humidity control requirements that you might want to satisfy that you just can't do with what you have now. So, it's not always as straightforward as the like-for-like replacement. That's usually going to be the most cost effective, but it's not going to get you through your problems. You got to evaluate each opportunity as just that, an opportunity to improve upon something that when it was first put in, they weren't playing by these rules and trying to create the indoor environments that we're trying to produce now. So think about upgrading these older systems to newer technologies.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And thank you all you gentlemen for being with us today. And I do want to just add, Eric Kluhl of Interior Workplace Solutions has put in the chat some information. Their company does space planning and reconfigures office settings to provide some social distancing or at least some breaks between personnel. If anybody on this call would like information on anything you've heard from the panelists today, you can go to the IFMA Lehigh Valley chapter website and in the contact page, put your request in there. That will come directly to myself and I will connect you with someone in the chapter that can provide that service or information. Or if you would like contact information for any of today's panelists, you can do the same. Again, I want to thank you. If anybody has any last minute questions you'd like to put into the chat, please do so. Again, I want to thank Mark, Joe, Brennan, and Rob for being part of this panel. It's been tremendous insight. We appreciate all the information you've learned over the last year and that you've been willing to share it with your fellow chapter members. Two other things real quick before we close out today's event. I do want to remind you of our April 28th tour of the National Museum of Industrial History in Bethlehem. That's over on 3rd Street near the Steel Stacks. That will be an in-person tour. And I also want to make everyone aware that the 2021 Board of Director elections are being conducted right now. So you may have received some emails requesting some nominees. Please, if you have anyone in mind, get that information back via that email, and we will be proceeding. We'll be actually be holding the election in May. So you have another 2+ months to put nominees forward. I do not see any further questions other than great presentation. So I'm putting that all back to the wonderful panelists today. And I appreciate everybody joining. You all have a great weekend.
All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Mike, for the little shout out there at the end. And that was great content and really good to kind of see the different perspectives here today. So just wanted to reach out, stay on here for a second, and thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem, Eric. I saw it in there and it was relevant. You know, don't feel bad about, you know, chiming in on that because it was relevant to today's conversation. So hopefully it'll result in some opportunity for you.
Excellent. Yep. Thanks, Mike. Take care. Have a good week.
You too. Bye-bye.